Charles Belloy. I'm an 11th grader in San Francisco, and I wrote a paper on reactions to skepticism. So in this case, that would mean skepticism, as in the belief that we have no rational way of knowing anything, and therefore defending any of our values, our societal structures, or anything we claim to know. Next slide. So first of all, the goal of the paper was to compare, I would say, two extreme versions in how they contrast, but two different reactions to the skeptical arguments. So I will not be necessarily going over the arguments for skepticism, which tend to rely on the inconsistency in human knowledge and reasoning, but instead I will be comparing nihilism and pragmatic skepticism that both contrast. So I'll be exploring the societal and individual implications of the fulfillment of both views, and I'll contrast the potential dangers of any radical change being made with regards to very rational knowledge, and of course analyze the potential shortcomings of any of these skeptical views and how we act upon them. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Charles. Hi. I'm getting some feedback that it's echoing a bit. The sound quality isn't that great, and it might make it difficult to hear you. Is that something that you're able to fix on your end?
I can try.
If possible, would it work if you just spoke without the headsets? Perhaps that's what's causing it.
Yes, I can try. I think the room is echoey, so.
Yep, no worries.
Does this sound better?
It sounds better to me. It sounds better to me. A little bit less echoing. Yeah, I got some feedback in the chat that it is echoing a bit, and I thought so too. I think it sounds better. Try saying something.
How is this?
Yeah, I think it sounds better to me. Let's keep it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Sorry about that. Oh, and next slide. So, first of all, I will introduce two different philosophical perspectives. So the first is active nihilism. This was mainly proposed by French philosopher Gilles Deleuze in the 20th century, and it is an extreme case, extreme not necessarily as rational, but rather as the amount of action needed to be taken by an individual following this train of thought. And it calls for the destruction of our current basic society and everything that's part of it to then rebuild another world. The idea being that we are completely limited by a basic society, that as humans who have a drive for freedom and for knowledge, we should act only on what we know and therefore not live in a society that is baseless. And then on the other hand, you have the pragmatic skeptic who does only what is practical with skepticism, therefore separate completely the acknowledgement of skepticism or the rational belief from actions in society, which the pragmatic skeptic considers to be irrational and sometimes even. Next slide, please. So for nihilism, the main approach of nihilism is creating a society that isn't based on any false or unprovable claims. So that essentially means that anything that we can't perfectly justify, we have no reason to follow and instead restrict us. And because to the nihilist, the only real value is freedom. And the reason for this is that freedom is directly reliant on your own personal experience as opposed to your experience with relation to others. So any other values need you to act with respect to others, but not freedom. And that's why any limit to our freedom by some other value is baseless. So another famous philosopher that worked on nihilism, Bettimo, says there are no ultimate foundations before which our freedom should stop. So to do so, that means we would have to completely destroy our society. So this doesn't mean some sort of bloody revolution. Of course, this could mean any sort of restructuring of our current society. The idea being that any part of society that is not directly philosophically provable would then end up being seen as inherently useless to our newer society. And so this is called negative affirmation, which is to not take responsibility for, to take on the burden of what is, but to release, to set free what lives. So the idea here being that any sort of great society would be good, inherently good to make the switch, even though it seems destructive. There is an affirmation to it. You are not just destroying what is broken, you are creating something. Next slide, please. So then as far as a criticism of nihilism, I think the main issue I have seen with it is it cannot completely emancipate us, and it assures destruction while only hoping for creation. Essentially, what this means is that the nihilist view, while it may be way more appealing in that it is trying to stay only grounded in rationality and try to create a better life, the only thing we can be certain of is that when we destroy our old society, the old society will be completely destroyed, while we must just hope that the creation of the new society is somehow better. And the issue with this is that there is no way to have some sort of pragmatic lifestyle to interact with society while sometimes ignoring some rational thought. So in this case, nihilism would be impossible because our identity is stuck in the world it wants to destroy. Any impulses, according to nihilism, that we don't consider to be a part of our identity inherently limit our freedom. So a very extreme case of that would be if you're hungry and you eat, you wouldn't call your own hunger something part of you. You would call it something affecting you, and therefore you would have to not eat because if you wanted to be perfectly free. But a more reasonable version of that would be when you interact in society and you interact irrationally, you want to get rid of that because that is a limiting factor in your pursuit of a better life. And then finally, the main issue is that perfect freedom for several people is impossible. From the moment that one person has the ability to do anything, they have the ability to impede the freedom of others. Therefore, any society which requires having several people that exist cannot assure the freedom of all these people, because the only reason that the nihilist really likes freedom is that the freedom is inherently individual, and that it is proposing to create a society that is not individual. Next slide, please. So then for pragmatic skepticism, it is a skeptic point of view. So it rationally completely accepts any argument that proposes that we cannot know anything. But it is trying to avoid any potential painful consequences of acting on skepticism. So the main fear of the pragmatic skeptic is that there will be pain in any change made with our new knowledge. So the idea being that there is a complete dissociation of what you think rationally, and then how you feel. And anytime you feel, that is what's positive or negative. Rational thought has no positivity or negativity in your life. Therefore, you need that complete dissociation. This essentially means that the pragmatic skeptic believes, or rather is satisfied enough with our current world, that he does not believe that there could be a better way of improving society. So it's less that he is completely satisfied with the world as it is, but rather that any risk into him to be too much of a risk. And therefore, he would rather have slow and steady advancement of society as we have seen through history, rather than abrupt change. Next slide, please. So the main critique of pragmatic skepticism, and the reason pragmatic skepticism isn't seen as a positive act of skepticism, is because it is compliant. Essentially, what the pragmatic skeptic is saying is that he will not do anything even with the new knowledge. That is, the pragmatic skeptic is inactive. So essentially, the reason this could be defensible is it allows more compliance. Being a negative reaction to skepticism does not change anything, does not destroy, but does not create. And the reason for this is that rationality isn't the best basis for living. If we live purely rationally, that would not necessarily mean that we would have a satisfied or good life. Because we take pleasure in parts of society. For example, when you follow a value that you have intrinsically, while the nihilist would tell you that value is limiting your actions, because it is, and you have no real rational reason to believe it. And yet we still take inherent pleasure in following our own inherent values that we find to be correct. Even though we're just perceiving to be doing the right thing. And then we also get pain from any change or removal of our current life. So even if there was a better society, should we destroy our own, the pain we would receive from having a complete change in our lifestyle would be such that most people would not find it worth it, and the people that would have to make the change would then would only be able to comfort themselves, if you will, with pure rational thought, which does not tend to work. And so therefore, I would say that compliance allows the most improvement between the two. Next slide, please. So I guess to conclude is that nihilism only considers the part of skepticism that it supports. So ignoring the part that's contradicted. The complete upheaval of the nihilist in terms of values means that it cannot critique any other system, because to do so it would have to call it either good or bad, and in doing that it would be basing itself off irrational values. It is so destructive initially that it cannot formulate its own argument. And I do believe that pragmatic skepticism can lead to good outcomes. I think that as we have advanced in philosophy and science, we have had more reason to believe that we cannot actually know anything certainly. We have, now that we know more about the brain and we have more arguments for skepticism, we do have a large conflict between our morals and our rational thought. And I still believe that anyone with a satisfied life needs to have some irrational thought, because rational thought, once again, does not connected to any emotion. And so to truly be a skeptic, one must not only live according to the rational conclusions, which is a very sad conclusion as far as philosophy is concerned, because personally I feel like, what is the point in the end if not to live rationally? But I do think there's a certain beauty to life in that we don't necessarily purely have to act rational, because it can be destructive.